Good to go. Cool. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Allison Maher. I'm an engineering manager on the Microsoft Edge team. And today I'm going to be discussing a new API that we're working on called ariaNotify that provides authors with a more ergonomic way of sending important information to AT users on the web. So before we dive into the details of ariaNotify, I want to give a bit of background information to get us all on the same page. So first off, what is an AT? So an AT stands for Assistive Technology. ATs are the products, equipment, and systems that enhance learning, working, and daily living for persons with disabilities. Some examples of ATs that you'll see when working on the web are screen readers, which reads out the content on the screen to a user, as well as braille displays. And these first two are the ones that we are targeting most closely with the ariaNotify API. There are other examples such as voice-driven ATs, magnifier, and high contrast mode. And beyond these, there's many other types of ATs on the market, but the first two are the main focuses for this talk. So it can sometimes be difficult to convey to some AT users what is provided to sighted users through visual cues. For example, confirmation of action events, such as when text is successfully bolded or not, or letting a user know when someone has entered a meeting or sent a reaction like applause during a live presentation. Other examples include error messaging. And these are just a few of the examples where an author may want to send some sort of notification to a blind or low vision users to allow them to have a fully enriched experience on the web. There's one currently available tool authors have to notify users of state changes today, and it is through something called ARIA Live Regions. So ARIA Live can be set on a dynamically changing element, and when the state of that element changes, the AT will notify the user. The possible states it can take are off, which means the change should not be announced. Polite, which means that there's important information for the user, but it's not urgent. And assertive, which means immediate action needs to be taken by the user. So in this example here that I provided is a sign-up form where the paragraph element has an assertive live region set on it, and the author uses this paragraph to notify users of error messages, for example, if a certain form field needs to be completed. So although live regions are capable of providing AT users with more information, there are some pain points that come along with this API. So for starters, it only works with dynamically changing content. So if an author wants to provide notifications in other scenarios, such as confirmation of action, they resort today to mimicking dynamically changing content through off-screen nodes. This means that text can be separately discoverable by screen reader users with their visual cursor. This mechanism can also fail when a user enters a modal dialogue. The other drawback of live regions that we heard from end users and developers was that they don't behave consistently across ATs today, creating poor experiences across the web. They also lack richness and context and have primitive prioritization options. So beyond the drawbacks around live region ergonomics, we have also heard from AT users that they're frustrated when they hear irrelevant notifications and that notifications are often overused and noisy. They want more control over the notifications that they hear. Some ATs also filter out notifications in some scenarios, which can lead to missed information. So as a result, our goals for a new notification solution is to create a consistent and predictable end user experience where users have more control. We also want to empower screen reader developers in accomplishing goal number 1 by providing clear expectations and context for how to support our new solution. And thirdly, we want to empower web developers by providing a tool that improves the ergonomics of handling notifications in a consistent way and providing developers with options to fine-tune the end user experience. So with those goals in mind, the solution that we came up with is called ariaNotify. And ariaNotify is a JavaScript API that allows authors to directly tell a screen reader what to read. In its most basic form, an author can provide a string to be read by the AT. And so, for example, in this very simple scenario, an author can use ariaNotify to let an AT know that they should announce bold on in a text editing scenario. Notifications provided by ariaNotify are sent to an AT on behalf of a source node, which can be the document itself as depicted in the first example here, or it could be any other element in the DOM as depicted in the second example. And beyond simply supplying a string to read, ariaNotify also has an option for authors to provide the priority of the notification. So the priority can either be none or important depending on the urgency of the notification. The priority of the notification need to determine where in the output queue the string should be added. And as you can note in this example here on the slide, the priority is set to important since it is an urgent error message that needs to be conveyed to the user. So as you may have noticed, the priority is very similar to the assertive and polite keywords that you already have access to via ARIA Live Regions today. And one new proposal that comes with ariaNotify is the ability to set the notification interruptibility. So interrupt can be either none, all, or pending, which I will define in more detail in the next slide. But these can be used to determine what should be interrupted from the previous notification sent to the AT. For example, if you're uploading a large list of files to the cloud, you could set the interrupt to pending to only announce the current file that is being uploaded, which could provide a less noisy user experience. So now let's dive a little bit deeper into the possible values of interrupt. So first up, if an author sets interrupt to none, it means that the notification should be announced by the AT and all other notifications should continue to be spoken as well. An interrupt of all means that the notification should be added. However, if the currently speaking notification is from the same node and the priority of the notification is of equal or lesser importance, that notification should be silenced. Any other notifications matching that same description should be flushed from the queue that the AT already has. A value pending is similar to all, except that it will let any currently speaking notification complete, and then it may flush any notifications of that same source and of equal or lesser priority that's already in the queue. So the other additional functionality that is currently specified with ariaNotify proposal is an option to provide a notification type. In the current explainer, this is called a notification ID, but based off of discussions at TPAC, this is likely going to be changed to a name of type or notification type. The type is a non-localized string that provides context to the screen reader, allowing user flexibility of how the notification is handled. The idea is that an AT could use the type to provide users with a way to filter out the notification based on the type, or potentially based on the type, they could opt into having a sound effect played instead of the notification string. There has been several points of feedback from the ARIA working group around this property. Some feel that it should be a registry or a preset list of options to make this valuable. Others feel that this functionality should actually be owned by the web app instead of the AT itself. So the details of this particular property are still being worked out in the working group. However, I've provided one example here of a case where the type is used in an online meeting application. So if a user sends a reaction of applause, the author may send an ARIA notification that notes this with the type set to reaction. An AT may use this to provide more customization, such as playing a sound effect instead of speaking the string itself. That actually concludes all the available functionality that is supplied by ariaNotify API. For a bit of extra context, the API was heavily influenced by the UIA notification event, which is a Windows-specific API. So as such, there's already a good deal of existing support for the API on Windows and its associated screen readers. However, the definition of the interrupt property has been adjusted to meet author needs a bit better, so ATs like narrator will need to be updated to match this new interrupt behavior. Other operating systems have limited notification support today. Our goal is to work with these ATs to provide a consistent experience across the board. However, with the goal of providing authors a more ergonomic notification mechanism than they have today while this work is being done across ATs, we plan to fall back to live regions behind the scenes on platforms that don't support the full ARIA notification functionality. This fallback mechanism transfers the priority to polite and assertive, and then the interrupt and type are ignored. One area that we aren't actually falling back to live regions, though, is within the Windows IA2 API. So there are actually IA2-based ATs on Windows still today, but the most highly used ATs on Windows support the UIA notification event already. Firefox is also working on implementing UIA support in their browser, and we are currently experimenting with enabling UIA in Chromium as well. So as such, our plan is to only support ariaNotify on Windows through UIA to avoid firing notifications, duplicate notifications from ATs on Windows. So the API is currently prototyped in Chromium behind a feature flag on Windows, Mac, and Android. You can test out the feature using these two feature flags that I've provided here. The GitHub team has been partnering with us to work on a draft spec and have also published a polyfill that you can also check out. So Ethan Jimenez on my team, which
Hi everyone, I'm
he
Ethan
created a
Jimenez from
demo.
the
I'll have
Pixels
this
Axles team, and today I want to showcase the prototype for the ariaNotify API we just landed in Edge and Chrome Canary. For users of screen readers, such as Narrator, web authors need a mechanism to notify users of changes in the contents of a web page. Area Live Regions is the current answer to this problem. In this example, we want to use a combo box to select a planet from a dictionary that we have in JavaScript. And we want to dynamically change the content of this element, planet info, to set the title and description of the planet. As such, we will define this planet info element as an ariaLive region through the ariaLive attribute, which we set to polite. Through some JavaScript, we can detect what option we selected from the combo box, and then dynamically set the information of the planet info, the planet title, and description to the ones that we have stored in the dictionary. Let's start on Narrator first so that we can listen to it.
Pane.
We will select one of the planets from the combo box.
Test with livregions.html work. Planet, Venus, combo box, collapsed, has pop-up. Suggestions available.
And then we will click Go to dynamically set the contents.
Go button. Venus at level 2. Venus is the second planet from the Sun. It is named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty.
This works perfectly fine for modern websites. However, we want to provide more customization and capabilities to announce dynamic content. Note that live regions have a couple of limitations that might be desirable from a functionality point of view. For example, if we click the Go button again, Narrator won't announce anything, since the contents of the page didn't change at all. I will click it a couple of times so that you may look at it. Another thing, what if we don't want to read the contents exactly as HTML? For example, you may have noticed that when Narrator announced the title, it said Venus at level 2. Here's where we introduce the ariaNotify API. ariaNotify is a JavaScript method that elements implement to send custom announcements to assistive technologies. With ariaNotify, we can use JavaScript to build an announcement string specific to our needs. Check this out. In this new test page, we have the same combo box with the same planet selections and the same planet info element, which we will populate dynamically in the title and description. However, we will not set the ariaLive property so that it doesn't announce the changes on its own. Instead, when we click Go, we will build an announcement string in JavaScript with a brief introduction that reads, here's some information about, and the planet selected. Then, the planet description, and finally, we will remind the user that they can press Go to repeat the planet information. Let's see it in the live repro here. Let's turn on Narrator first.
Pane.
And then we will select the planet. This time we'll select Earth.
Test with ariaNotify.html work. Planet, Earth, combo box, collapsed, has pop-up.
Then we click Go.
Go button. Here's some information about Earth. Earth is the third planet from the Sun and the only object in the universe known to harbor life. Press the Go button to hear this information again.
And that's it. We have a new announcement that says everything that we wanted to customize. Notice that by calling this method, we ensure that we announce the information even if the contents didn't change in the page. We can see it now if we click again, Go.
Earth is the third planet from the Sun and the only object in the universe known to harbor life. Press the Go button to hear this information again.
Now here's something cool. We can add reaction buttons to this example through some of these buttons that have some smiley faces, which we will map later here in the JavaScript to descriptions that we can announce through ariaNotify. For example, we have the thumbs value that we will announce as a thumbs up reaction. And later in JavaScript, we can detect exactly the value that we are clicking and announce it through ariaNotify. Let's see in an example here.
Thumbs up reaction button. You reacted with a thumbs up.
And we can even click it again and again and again to have more and more reactions.
You reacted with a thumbs up. You reacted with a thumbs up.
Notice that clicking the reaction button more than once might cue a couple of announcements. Would we use the interrupt all property or ariaNotify to stop other announcements? This is one of the ways that we can customize ariaNotify to better handle complex scenarios. Another useful option is the notification ID property. You can provide this string to be attached to the announcement so that screen readers might be able to process them differently or filter them. This capability is yet to be tested out by first-party partners, but we are very excited to see what scenarios we will be able to unblock.
That was a quick demo of this. Thanks to Ethan on my team who put that together. So next steps, although the API has made a lot of great progress over the last couple years, we still have a few remaining items to work through before we get this over the finish line. So firstly, we still need to land code for a live region fallback on Linux and Chrome OS. There were a couple large remaining issues in the ARIA working group to work through, for example, the notification type, which should help us in landing the final version of the spec. We also need to work with ATs to allow for consistent support of ariaNotify across the board. And as I mentioned on Windows, this API is very closely tied to UIA, so as a prerequisite, we need to ship UIA in Chromium. But our next big milestone is to start an origin trial in Chromium once all these major issues are worked through. The GitHub team has actually already implemented their code with ariaNotify behind a feature flag, but we'd love to get more web developer feedback with the full origin trial. So as I mentioned previously, there's some open issues on the ARIA working group. So if you have any thoughts or opinions, please feel free to leave comments there, or please feel free to open any new issues if you have thoughts. And with that, I'd like to thank the army of various collaborators who have helped with the ariaNotify API, of which this presentation would not be possible. So first off, thank you to Ethan, who did the implementation in Chromium, Doug Joffrey, who works on the Microsoft Office team. He helped PM the project and helped in pushing some of the standards conversations forward. And then Keith and Clay from the GitHub team, they helped in writing the draft spec, have helped in leading work group discussions, and created a polyfill. There's also a bunch of folks who reviewed the API, gave advice, so I've listed just a few here, but there are many others. And I'd also like to give a special shout out to Travis Leathed and Daniel Libby, who wrote the initial explainer for this. Although the shape of the API has changed a bit since then, it would not have been possible without all of the groundwork that they did. And that's all that I have. So I wanted to open up for any questions and discussions. And I've added a few questions here to get folks thinking. But if you have any thoughts or discussion topics to add, please feel free to raise those. Thank you. Yes.
At the risk of nominative determinism, for some of these questions around type or notification ID, did you look at the notifications API? It's got some sort of very similar functionality, like the tag is used to replace existing notifications with the notification tray, and there's some behavior around passing an ID back from events. Maybe that's something you could.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I don't think we've really investigated that, so that seems like a good place to start looking. So I'll definitely take note and look into that after this. Thanks. Yes.
This is like a little bit separate, but do you know, is the polyfill like self-voicing? Do they use like web speech or?
No, so basically what it does is it uses live regions under the hood, but they do their own QA mechanism to kind of mimic some of the behaviors that you get with ariaNotify.
Right.
Yep.
I want to say as part of the team that initially implemented some of these notifications in DevTools, you will be very excited to adopt this as soon as it's available. I don't know if it's possible to do an origin trial on the DevTools origin. Now that I think about it.
Yeah.
You don't need an origin trial. Just put it on.
I guess.
Go nuts.
Kind of similar to Alex's question about like looking at the notification API. So hi, I'm Riley. I work on Chrome for a number of devices things, and a conversation that has been going on in the device and sensors working group is around the vibration API, which is there are lots of reasons why your device might vibrate. This is not a notification API, obviously, but we provide this API for sort of developers to say, hey, right now, like I think it would be useful for the user if their device sort of vibrated to get their attention. And this like aspect of giving developers control of being able to like be specific about like this kind of notification feels kind of similar in the sense that you've got developers like building these sort of notification widgets within their site, right? It doesn't quite make sense to go out to like the system level notification API, but you're trying to build some kind of user experience within your application itself that you then have to think about like the accessibility aspects of. But like it feels like I guess what I'm wondering is in the accessibility space, is vibration a aspect of sort of how some of these notification widgets are built? And has there been any work in the sort of DOM space around creating like a notification element that might have some of these behaviors built into it? Or am I just completely going off in a weird direction with sort of what you're proposing here? Sorry, what?
Toast?
At least on the web, I'm not aware of any cases where we use kind of like rumbles or some sort of vibration to indicate any sort of notification. I think this is really the first kind of place where we're trying to investigate some of these like nuances of like, hey, is reading out the notification the right way to notify users of these things? Do users kind of want other mechanisms for this? I'm sure there's like other cases outside of like maybe the web that might use those sorts of things, but at least on the web, that's not something that I'm aware of today. Yes.
Thanks, Allison. It's great. Rick Byers from Chrome. Your last question here about should notification type be non-localized string. I don't have an opinion on this, but I'm really curious to hear from you. I think there's a pattern here in the web. Like many of us in the web standards community would always say, yes, fully specify it. Mm-hmm. But then I'm kind of guessing, I don't know much about accessibility, but I'm guessing when you talk to AT vendors, they probably say, no, like I want the flexibility to evolve and encourage web developers to make improvements without always being stuck on browsers to make changes.
Yeah.
We're hitting that same tension when it comes to integrating identity APIs with wallets. It's like, how much should we just pass through versus how much should we like strictly specify it? So I'm just curious to hear, what have you heard from accessibility, like AT technology vendors generally, about this trade-off between like browsers strictly standardizing the communication with AT tools versus allowing some amount of flexibility?
Yeah, we've heard a bit of both. So I think having like specified options does let them kind of have a very like distinct, they know exactly what to do. They don't have to do something special. And it allows developers to know like, hey, if I use this, it's actually going to do something rather than like hope it gets used by ATs later on. I think the other side of the coin is that like if an author, adds some notification that doesn't fall into these categories that we've added, do they have to go through the full specification process to add it? Will they go to those extents? Will it be used by all the different scenarios? So I think that there's kind of pros and cons to both. Like if we have a specified list, ATs will kind of pick those up and do something with them automatically. Whereas if we kind of let them do it free for all, they might have to kind of know like which ones are used the most, kind of figure out what to do with them. So I think there's pros and cons to both. And then I think if we do go the specification route and like map these to very specific set of lists, like who owns that, like where does that live, what is the right first set to go with. So both routes I think have some challenges.
I think there's any chance there's a sweet spot where you specify a bunch of existing ones, but then also say, look, if none of these work for you, feel free to make something up.
Yeah, I think
and then like you can use telemetry to see what actually becomes popular in practice, and then we can add those to the spec. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's another route that folks have brought up, and I think that seems like a nice way to go because it does kind of allow for flexibility, but does give the option like, hey, if we already know kind of a set of notifications that are commonly used across the board, we can kind of add those and make sure that those are used well across ATs.
I had a question kind of along those lines. You said it's like modeled after UIA API. Is that using a fixed list of these?
So I'm actually not sure because I don't know that it's really commonly used actually today, but they have this option to provide this this type through the API, but I don't think they really like the ATs are actually using it yet. But the functionality is there. They just need to actually go in and use it. Yes.
Yeah, I was checking that this is interesting, but it could be even more interesting for the users I've been seeing for the voice over features that we want to sometimes override the default focus readout of the text. So maybe it could be interesting to add an API for adding a hook for the focus event for in some cases overriding the default readout and just say in the hook say, okay, ariaNotify and send the message you want. That's instead of adding, just also being able to override in some cases what is being read out especially for focus when you are doing navigation and then you want to have a nicer sentence instead of constructing only from the DOM with aria name and aria description, whatever.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So you're saying like when focus changes, be able to override the message that's sent out in that.
Yeah, maybe add some API on aria for hooking to a specific event for a specific node. Okay, I'm going to meet the area focus description of this, and then in that case, you can hook to that event and say, okay, I'm just overriding, don't do anything else, and I'm going to send ariaNotify. Or just, okay, it's fine, but maybe tweaking somehow the behavior. Very likely the only way to do that would be overriding completely.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe if we can get some context, we could modify somehow the message that is sent to the user.
Yeah, that's a super interesting use case. I hadn't actually considered that. So I think that's something we can definitely think through. Essentially kind of allowing you to override what's read out in other scenarios that aren't necessarily notification, but like instead of reading out kind of as they're navigating, have a way to override that. It's super interesting. I'll have to give that some more thought.
Yeah, I think you can with the aria attributes. If you set like an aria name, I think it'll read that instead of the defaults.
Yeah, but sometimes it depends on the context. Maybe you need to always modify the aria name for that. Maybe it will be more easier for the developer to just hook to that point and say, okay, that's what I'm going to say, focus and be the level, even with some level configuration that is web application specific, and say, okay, because quite often we can set the notification preferences platform-wide, but in many cases, a web application could actually, that knows the context, could actually say, okay, we are going to be more verbose in this and this and this case, and that can be configurable. And then in these hooks that we could add, we say, okay, in these cases we are notifying, in these cases we are not, and in these cases we want to do something different or for the notification, for the readout.
Is maybe one way to think about that. What if you added the ariaNotify method to the focus event? Like if catching a focus event or handling a focus event allowed you to call ariaNotify on the event.
Yeah, exactly. That would be really useful.
Yeah, something to consider for sure. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes.
Have you thought much about what do you think the web developer activation properties of this are? Do you have a sense of whether there are, a few common component libraries that, this could be added into to get significant reach across the web? Or is this going to be one of these things where it's like, to get any non-trivial, beyond, Microsoft Office and GitHub, for example,
Mm-hmm.
like, is it going to be really hard to get developers to use, do you think?
I think in its most basic form, I'm hoping this is not too difficult for authors to opt into, just because it's basically just sending a JavaScript function with a string. So I'm hoping.
Do you think it's mostly end authors though, like authors of the sites, or is it going to be more frameworks? That's kind of more scalable if it's a small number of frameworks we need to.
I mean, I would guess that those are kind of a key place that we want to dive into is get the frameworks using this, because if they use them, then they're implemented elsewhere, and then it's only implemented once, kind of a thing. So I think those are kind of key scenarios that we want to dive into. And we do have kind of partner teams already looking at this from that perspective. And then also kind of applications like Teams, pretty much a ton of Microsoft partners are kind of looking for this. So we're super excited, and I think really looking to kind of get this one pushed forward. But yeah, like you mentioned, getting them in the frameworks, I think is definitely a great goal to get.
It'd be great to see like some case studies or something from the Microsoft partners just to activate the rest of the ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure.
I would hope that I would hope that the value add is going to be enough to drive adoption. When we were adding a lot of the accessibility features to DevTools, live regions was a regular pain point. That would have been wonderful to supplant with this. So particularly, I think repeating something was the big problem. So it would be nice to have.
Any other questions, topics? Yes.
there's a part of me that like looks at an API that allows the developer to make the AT like say something as something that's like very easily abused. But I'm curious sort of how your team is thinking about this. My thought is that basically like the site author can already put whatever text they want on the page and have the AT read it. So it's like kind of limited in terms of what they can do, except maybe like if it's going to read it out loud when they call notify, like is there like a user gesture requirement so that like it only can like spontaneously say something if the user's actually interacted with the page at that moment?
I think that folks from Apple brought this particular topic up. I think they even said that they would want some sort of like prompt to have, the user opt into getting notifications, which I think there's pros and cons to that, because let's say that they opt out of it, but then don't get important error messages or information that came along with this API. So I think, there's a balance to be played, because we want to make sure that they get the important information, but also don't want to spam them. So I think giving the users control over whatever that is, I think by default we should allow these to come through, especially assuming that there's important information being conveyed through these notification events. But I do think that having some way for users to opt out on certain sites that may be abusing it is something that we'll definitely want to be considering. And I think the type is something that might allow ATs to allow for this sort of functionality, but it is something that I think maybe even we could look at from like the browser's point of view, like, can we have an opt-out list for this particular feature?
Yeah, I was gonna say along those lines, like the prompt does kind of make sense for like a cross-origin iframe or something where there's like an at. You wouldn't want that to just be, constantly announcing, click here, buy my thing or something.
Yeah. But on the other hand, it's like if we're already trying to figure out like heuristics for like if the site pops up an element in the middle of the page and we want to read that, and we have heuristics that maybe try to read that, like this is equivalent. Like pages can choose to just put things up front that should be read. So it's like, how much is this different than that?
The way that we have solved that in other APIs that are potentially usable is to create a permission returning request API that generally allows something, and then turn the spigot off rather than turning it on. So put in place the permission requesting API, and then just have it pass through in the common case.
A good question. How does that work today with assistive technology and cross-origin iframes? Like, is it possible for ads today to demand AT focus and present?
That's a good question. I've never tested it out, but yeah,
that would be a pretty scummy thing for ads to do. But
They have to get in focus. Right?
they have to get focus.
I think so.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Any questions from online? If not, I know looks like we're over time. So thanks everyone for joining. Feel free to reach out if you have other thoughts. Thank you.